Hello and welcome to Associated University, a group that is designed to provide supply chain management professionals with access to information and practical solutions concerning the industry's current hot topics. Today we will be discussing various aspects of automation, including industry trends, benefits, hurdles, types of solutions, as well as how to evaluate if automation is right for your organization. Your presenter today is Troy Donnelly. Troy is the Director of Engineering and Design at Associated. Prior to joining Associated, Troy was the Project Director at Peach State, where he led client strategic supply chain initiatives and large distribution automation projects. He has also held positions of Director of Solution Design and Manager of Simulations and Systems with Dematic. During Troy's tenure, he has simulated and designed over 50 systems across multiple industries. We have scheduled 15 minutes at the end of the presentation to answer any questions you may have. You may send your questions at any time during the presentation or at the end by simply typing your questions into the questions pane, which is located at the right-hand side of your screen. Following this webinar, we will also be providing all attendees with a copy of this presentation. And now I will pass it over to Troy to get us started.
Thank you, Sherry. Okay, so for today, what I'd like to go through are what are some of the industry trends that are driving automation, then go through the benefits, cover some of the hurdles, looking at the spectrum of solutions, and then towards the end, what are some things to consider when you're evaluating automation, and then some key takeaways. So when we look at some of the industry trends, one of the big things that's driving automation today is the labor pool is shrinking. And one of the big drivers of that, I think everyone's aware of, is that a lot of different kids now, when they're going into different industries, there's a big promotion for going to college and everything else, and there's just not that labor force that wants to work in a warehouse and in a distribution environment. So that's causing the labor pool to shrink. On top of that, we have rising labor costs. That combined with healthcare, workman's compensation, all of these things are driving the labor costs up, as well as the shrinking labor pool. Since there are fewer people to fill these positions, that's driving up the wages to fill them. One of the big emphasis that I've seen is safety and ergonomics. This has been really a high point for a lot of companies, that they want to make sure that they have a safe environment and an ergonomic workplace. And with all of those aspects, many times they're looking at automation to try to fill those needs. Another aspect that we're seeing a lot of is permitting requirements. That due to various reasons in different locales, the permitting requirements for a lot of different manual conventional systems are becoming very absorbent. And with that, it's pushing companies to look at automation. Since they have those permitting requirements, sometimes automation can allow them to avoid some of those costs. And then probably one of the biggest areas that is driving automation is each picking. And when we look at each picking, a lot of that has to do with e-commerce. Since a lot of distribution environments are now going to supplying orders through e-commerce and through mail order, that's driving each picking. And each picking, if you do it manually, you do it in a conventional environment, it can be a very expensive way to order fulfill. So automation provides a more cost-effective alternative to handle that. So now let's look at some of the benefits of automation. The first one would probably be process improvement, and this is one where I think it's interesting in an aspect of many times automation can facilitate things that otherwise wouldn't be practical. Whether it be directed order fulfillment, and with that we look at pick to light, pick to voice, saying that, okay, we're going to help the operators identify which part to pick and how many of them. And then you get into dynamic slotting. Dynamic slotting is you can use automation to change the pick face out. So let's say a certain SKU is in this pick face location right now, and in 2 hours you'll have automation change that pick face. So dynamic slotting is definitely a good example of how automation can facilitate a process that otherwise wouldn't be practical. And then when you look at a pick and pass order fulfillment, kind of by the nature of it, you're going to be leveraging conveyor automation in order to facilitate that type of order fulfilling. And all of these, of course, are methods to reduce costs by reducing the amount of labor required to do order fulfillment. And the last one here I mentioned is goods-to-person picking. Of course, this is a very hot topic at present, and of course, in order to make goods-to-person picking, practical, you're going to leverage automation to handle bringing those goods to the operator. So another point that I mentioned earlier was safety and ergonomics. So we have examples here showing of presenting work at an ergonomic level for people to do order fulfilling. And then we also have harsh environments. Of course, harsh environments has always been a good application of automation, whether it be freezer environments or whether it be some type of hazardous environment where you don't want people working in it in a daily point. And then lastly is eliminating repetitive tasks. And this is where you get into kind of the full automation of using robots to completely remove the task. Another benefit, of course, is labor savings, and this is one that everyone always looks at, especially when they look at travel. Everyone recognizes that travel to and from a location is a non-value-added activity, so it's always an aspect that's really on the forefront of trying to eliminate that labor. Another aspect is pick face replenishment. That you have an order fulfilling system and you're doing order fulfilling out of it. Doing the replenishment to that pick face, again, is kind of a non-value added activity that is a good application for automation. And then, as I mentioned earlier, goods-to-person stations. Another aspect that automation helps is in improved storage density. And a couple ways it does that is it can reduce the space required for the fork truck aisles. Instead of a 12-foot aisle, now you can perhaps have a 5-foot aisle or a 6-foot aisle when you put in automation. Also increasing the storage density of the product. The picture I show below there is showing a mobile aisle. So you can have the actual storage aisles that move and collapse to improve your storage density. And then you have storing product in deep lanes. You may have product that fits this profile where you have many pallets of a certain SKU, and the only way really to facilitate storing that product deep, be it 5, 6, 7, 10, 20 deep, is going to be to leverage automation to facilitate it. And then utilizing the vertical space. And this is always one that I think people look to pretty quickly when they look in a warehouse, and if they're not utilizing all the vertical space, one of the first things that comes to mind is, okay, is this an application for automation to increase the amount of product that we're storing in this same facility? Another benefit is the cost of construction. And as we mentioned earlier with storage density, whenever we're able to reduce the square footage of a facility, we're going to have some construction savings. And another aspect of that is when you get into freezer environments, by reducing that cubic space, you're also going to save money on your HVAC costs. Another kind of anecdotal thing is rack-supported structures. So when you start looking at large ASR structures, now the actual automation becomes the building for you. You just put a skin on the outside of the rack, and now you avoided, there's some cost comparisons, but you're avoiding the cost of creating a building and putting the automation in it. Now the automation is the building, and with that there's also some tax advantages when it comes to depreciation. Another application for automation is security. This is a big one as well in terms of, no one is going to be able to access the material that's stored in one of these environments because it is completely restricted off. And because of the different safety aspects of different types of automation, there are interlocking gates and things of that nature to ensure that no one is getting into an area where they're not supposed to be. And plus you have a record of when that product is pulled out, who is picking product from it, and the whole cycle counting aspect. So again, security is another aspect that people start to look at when they consider automation. Okay, so now let's look at some of the hurdles to pursuing automation. One of the biggest hurdles that I've seen is usually company and management culture. Many times that it's just the culture of the company that for whatever reason, it could be a previous experience with automation, it could be a number of things where they just philosophically do not believe in pursuing automation. And then you also have the management who are, let's say getting closer to retirement, and they don't want, they recognize the work required to pursue an automated project, and they just don't want to get into it at this stage of their career. Unfortunately, the only thing I've ever seen with this is you got to wait for the culture to change. And I've seen this before where I've walked into different environments, and an environment they had 20,000 pallets stored on the floor, and they just philosophically were not going to view it any differently, weren't going to pursue automation. 4 years later, management changed, and they recognized the ROI for an ASRS, and they put one in that facility and then numerous others after it. It was not ROI driven. The ROI was always there. It was really just a management shift. Another hurdle is lack of expertise with automation, and this is something that I've seen grow even more through the years. And a lot of it has to do with, during the downturn, a lot of engineering departments got reduced because they weren't pursuing capital projects, and as we've come out of it, they just haven't filled those positions again. So with that, with company engineering departments being very thin, they don't have the internal expertise anymore of perhaps dealing with automation, so now it's kind of put them in a catch-22 situation. The other thing is, many times the project schedules don't allow consideration for automation. If someone's walking down a path and they already have the project laid out for a conventional facility, and they know how long that project will take, coming in at the last minute and saying, okay, let's consider automation, many times that's just not practical, because an automated system is going to take longer to design on the front end than a conventional facility. So with that, to overcome that hurdle, I would probably advise, getting with an industry expert to help bridge that gap with your current engineering department and get that expertise so you know what automation to apply. And then also engage that partner early enough so that you can evaluate an automated solution in earnest versus having the schedule dictate what solution you end up going down. Another hurdle always is business uncertainty. A lot of companies will come in and say, yeah, we'd like to do automation, but we just don't really know, what our business is going to be doing in the next couple of years. And this is a challenge for every company. And another hurdle with this gets into the same thing where I mentioned earlier about a lengthy evaluation process. That many times if you wait long enough and you go through an evaluation process long enough, the only answer you will have is a conventional facility because it's the only one that would be viable to do in the project deadline. So my advice on this would be that when you evaluate the project, evaluate its ROI on the business horizon that you do have. If you have a business horizon of 2 or 3 years, well, that would be a valid horizon to evaluate the automation for, and ensure that you have an ROI that covers that business horizon. And you also have to recognize that not making a decision is a decision. In terms of, if you say, well, we're going to consider it, but don't want to do it now. It's important to call a rose and say, okay, we're just not ready to pursue automation at this time. Process improvement paradox. So this is one that I've seen happen numerous times, is that you have a lot of companies that have the desire to exhaust conventional process improvement initiatives as much as possible before they consider automation. And this is unfortunately what ends up happening, is that you'll have company A, and they've done an excellent job in their process improvement and lean initiatives and things of that nature, and they've done a great job of really getting as much cost out of their operation as they can. Then you have company B that has not done much at all during that time, and then they end up implementing automation and hurdling over company A. At the same time, company A is not able to make that hurdle because the sad truth is they've taken so much cost out that the incremental capital investment for the automation, they just don't have the justification for. And it's an unfortunate circumstance. It really does kind of penalize the company that has done a great job with process improvement, because they're not able to make the same ROI hurdle that a company that didn't implement those process improvement procedures and then just implemented automation. So my recommendation for this is that when you are looking at process improvement initiatives, to include automation as part of that. I think that's probably the best way to overcome that hurdle. Another hurdle, of course, is capital requirement. There's always the perception that automation is expensive, and there are, true company capital spending limits. With this, I would recommend, always focusing on the return on investment of the capital. Different types of technology have different prices associated to them, but many times, especially when it gets to the executive level, if a project has a return, it has a return. And when it comes to paying for that return, then you can look at different things as leasing options and things of that nature if getting those necessary funds is a challenge. And there are more than enough companies out there that are anxiously looking at leasing options, especially in the current environment where money is relatively cheap. The other aspect I would suggest is recognize also that there's a diminishing return on capital investment. That there is a point of where the automation just isn't paying for itself anymore. That to go that next level, that capital investment just doesn't have the same return as lower hanging fruit. Another big one is sunk costs. And this is definitely when you get into what I'd refer to as a brownfield environment, that you have an existing facility and you want to look at putting in automation. Someone comes up with a solution and it's able to reduce your square footage by half, but you're in this pickle where you're not getting any benefit on the ROI for the space savings because you don't necessarily have something else to fill that space. And this is a challenge I've seen many times. So my recommendation here is that whenever a company is looking at options of either a new construction or leasing contracts or doing another facility, that's the time to look at automation, because you may be able to then roll that cost avoidance into your ROI. That not having to go out to another facility would be a true impact on the ROI when you're evaluating an automated solution. So now let's look at the spectrum of solutions. When I look at different solutions, I'm going to look at them first from a storage aspect, and then movement, and then order fulfillment. We got to start with storage because you're going to have to put it somewhere. And then we're going to look at them from the handling unit, whether it be a pallet, a case, or a piece. So where are we storing that? How are we moving it? And how are we filling that order? So first, when we look at storage, we're going to look at what's the impact on selectivity, activity, and density. How dense do we want to store it? Because if we store it real dense, we may not have the selectivity that we require for the order fulfilling. So the first thing we're going to look at here is pallet storage. And some of these costs here are purely kind of anecdotal, so we can get an idea of where they go in the spectrum of costs. So we have traditional post and beam rack. You go 1 or 2 deep. You got drive-in rack, which is more expensive. You get more dense storage there, but it's a more expensive solution. Same thing with pushback. Now you can store deeper. You're saving on your square footage, but it's a more costly storage medium. Same thing as pallet flow. And then you get into deep lane. In deep lane now, as I mentioned earlier, in order to facilitate deep lane storage, it's going to require some level of automation to facilitate that. So now when we look at case storage, unlike pallet storage, where many times our costs per location went up when we went deeper, on case storage, our cost per location is actually going down. And that has a lot to do with cases weigh a lot less, and it's really the weight of the rack infrastructure that has most of the load-bearing aspect to it. The cost of the product really isn't having a significant impact on the cost of that racking. So by going to deeper storage, you're really saving on your cost per location. And we look at piece storage. And now piece storage, many times you're dealing with, totes or shelving or cases, things of this nature that you're going to end up doing a piece picking order fulfillment out of. And as we go down in these different levels here, looking at drawers and totes and carousels, as I mentioned in the other one when it comes to pallet, when we get into these other mediums, now we are dealing with automation. In a carousel, the storage medium itself is the automation. Same thing with a vertical lift module. That storage medium is the piece of automation that's going to also help facilitate order fulfillment. So now let's look at movement. In movement, we start to consider throughput versus speed. Many times people get caught up in speed, but I think the industry has done a good job of recognizing that throughput is really what matters and not necessarily speed. Because when you deal with speed, you start to deal with issues such as load stability, different rack parameters, safety concerns, and things of that nature. And the industry has really shifted around now is looking at many more less expensive machines versus large machines that are expensive and very fast. So when we look at pallet movement, the two types of storage retrieval movement would be storage retrieval machines and shuttles. On the transportation side, we have automated guided vehicles and conveyor. On the pallet storage retrieval side, we have a traditional ASR as platen, and platen just means kind of a little shelf that reaches out and picks up product. And we have rotating fork storage retrieval machines. Rotating fork storage retrieval machines are very interesting application because they can use standard post and beam rack, which really makes that a very cost beneficial solution versus drive-in rack because the drive-in rack is so much more expensive. Many times in pallet ASR solutions, the rack costs more than the rest of the system. A lot of the money is in that drive-in rack. So if you're able to avoid that by using a rotating fork, that becomes a very beneficial solution. Another type of movement device would be an aisle changing storage retrieval machine. Again, here, now we're getting to machines that you don't necessarily need one machine per aisle. So if you have slower moving product, this could be a very good solution for you because you're able to avoid the cost of dedicated machines per aisle. And then the shuttle. As we showed before on a deep lane solution, some type of shuttle vehicle is going to be necessary to facilitate that solution. Now we look at pallet transportation. Pallet conveyor would be the traditional means of doing that. Pallet conveyor can be a little pricey because of the number of drives it requires, number of motors. As we get down to different solutions, we have the STVs, which is kind of like an AGV on rails, and it can be a very cost-effective solution in comparison to pallet conveyor, depending on again how the system's designed. So for that system, again, you're avoiding all the different motors that pallet conveyor has, but you're replacing it with a rail system that has vehicles traveling on it. And then for again lower volume solutions, an AGV is a very good pallet transportation device. So now we look at case movement. Again, we'll look at both the storage retrieval case movement and transportation case movement. For storage retrieval solutions, again, you have a storage retrieval machine, which can handle multiple cases or totes at the same time, or you have shuttle vehicles. And shuttle vehicles has, of course, been a big impact on the industry in the last couple of years. And again, this is an aspect where looking at multiple smaller cost vehicles can be a very good cost-effective solution versus one really fast vehicle. When we look at case transportation solutions, we have traditional case transportation conveyor, we have accumulation conveyor, motor-driven roller, and then we have sorters. When we look at sorters, again, we have a myriad, kind of a spectrum of different sorters going from a pop-up wheel all the way to cross belt. And when you get, of course, many times in a case conveyor solutions, the majority of the cost is sitting in the sorter because that is where a lot of the intelligence is, and that's also the area that's usually handling the highest volume of cases going through it. And with this, I haven't seen a lot of different technology come out. Shoe sorting, probably the narrow belt sorter is probably one of the most prominent right now because of the different e-commerce each picking environment. That's probably been the sorter that I've seen in more applications as of late. Now we look at piece picking or piece storage retrieval solutions. Now we're looking at the shuttles. Again, we're storing product in totes. Then we have the OPEX solution. Again, the OPEX solution is very similar to other shuttles, only it's an end-of-aisle type of solution. Kind of instead of dealing with the shuttles traveling in the horizontal plane up and down the aisle, the OPEX shuttles travel vertically up and down. And then they have an end-of-aisle interface. Then you have the auto store, which is now you have the vehicles that are traveling above the storage medium. And they're actually picking up those totes in the different quadrants and bringing them to a goods-to-person station. And then you have a Kiva solution, which is now the storage racks are stored different places, and you're using kind of a small AGV to bring those storage racks to a goods-to-person station. So now let's look at order fulfillment. Again, and with order fulfillment, one of the big aspects is what the order profile looks like. And with that, this is where a lot of complexity comes into play with software, of trying to manage those order profiles and fulfill them in the most cost-efficient manner. When we look at pallet order fulfillment, it's fairly simple. When you look at an automated pallet order fulfillment, really probably the only thing you're going to be looking at is some type of AGV. An AGV doing automatic truck loading. When we look at case order fulfillment, now we have the pick-to-pallet, which it might be an automated walkie rider. The automated walkie riders will direct themselves, kind of like an AGV, to the place where orders are being filled and then drive to the dock with a completed filled order on a pallet. You have pick-to-belt, where you have people picking different cases in a pick module, putting them on a belt that is then taking it to the shipping dock. You also have an ASRS. Now the ASRS, now it's actually doing the order fulfilling for you. So if you need a case of this or a case of that, it's actually doing that picking operation for you. And then you have palletizing, getting into an automated palletizing solution for that case fulfillment. And one thing I want to mention with that automatic palletizing, that is an aspect that a lot of companies are looking at from an ergonomic standpoint. That having people manually creating those pallets, of course, has different ergonomic aspects to it. So many times they're looking at automated palletizing solutions as a way to overcome some different ergonomic challenges. So now when we look at the piece order fulfillment solutions, you have pick to cart, you have goods to person, pick and pass, A-frame, where now the A-frames are kind of like a dispenser. They are filling those orders into totes. And then you have robotic. I think many times goods to person stations will eventually incorporate different robotic picking aspects. Now when we look at piece picking solutions, processing, we have RF picking, we have pick to light, we have put to light. Again, pick to light, put to light, whether you're picking from a location, it'll tell you which product to pick from. And if you're putting product into a location, it's going to tell you which package to put it into. And then there's voice picking. An interesting aspect when it comes to voice picking, I've been very surprised personally at the speeds that they've been able to achieve now with voice picking solutions. Historically, pick-to-light solutions were always much faster, and now what we're seeing is that people are able to recognize the commands so quickly that they're able to really compete with many pick-to-light solutions. So now when we take all those things, we pull them together, and then now it becomes an integrated system. And what binds all those aspects together is the controls and software. When we look at controls and software, a traditional kind of structure for that is you have the company's ERP system on the top layer. Underneath that, we have the WMS system, which is handling the order fulfillment decisions, handling inbound activities, interfacing with the ERP on the management of the distribution center. Underneath that WMS function, WMS many times will coordinate manual operations, but for automated systems, many times it requires a warehouse control software to make equipment decisions. Under that WCS layer, that's where you may have your different conveyor PLCs, programmable logical controllers. Again, those controllers are making decisions based on what a sensor tells it to do and an actuator. So a sensor is tripped, and that then causes the conveyor PLC to do something, whether it be lift up some rollers or move a divert arm, something of that nature. So this gives you kind of an overview of what a controls and software infrastructure looks like in a distribution center. So now, again, when we pull all that together, this is just an example of an integrated system. So we have the storage aspect with the racking there. We have the shuttles that are bringing that product in and out of the system. We have the lift in the front bringing that product down to a conveyor system, down to a goods-to-person station where someone's doing order fulfillment. So we take all those different pieces that we talked about earlier, pull them together into an integrated system. So now, what approach to evaluating an automation? My first piece of advice would be not to pave the cow path. And that is, many times people will look at their existing operation and they will say, okay, we want to automate it. And many times they look at automating their existing processes. And many times that is not going to provide the best ROI. The best way to provide the best ROI is to really break it down and look at what are you trying to accomplish and look at a different way of accomplishing it with automation. Another thing is identify order grouping. So many times too people say, all right, we want to automate our process. There may be different aspects of that process that just don't have the ROI. Whether it be, your A movers, your B movers, your C movers, or it may be different physical aspects of your product. You may have product that is just too large or too heavy, and not everything can be automated. It's really just a matter of, is it practical? Does it have the ROI? So first I'd say, again, look at your process from a fresh perspective, and then try to break down your different types of products and order fulfillment groupings and address them separately. You may be able to find a good ROI for different aspects of automation there. After you do that, now look at, okay, what are some different tactical elements to look at for each group? Whether it be conventional, being reach trucks, or whether it be AGVs, or ASRS, mobile rack, tilt tray, whatever it would be. Once you identify what your order fulfillment requirements are, now you can look at, okay, what different pieces of the puzzle does it make sense to fill those orders. Once you've decided, okay, here's the different pieces of technology that we think make the best sense to fulfill our orders, now you start to create different layout options. And there are a lot of different layout options. The most common driver in a layout option is typically facility constraints. That whether it's being an existing facility in our existing lot, that okay, here's our constraints. Now we need to get a solution that fits within these constraints. When you consider different things on the ROI, I'd always advise eliminating an entire process or a shift, because the challenge is you can never eliminate half of a person or half of a shift. And with that constraint, many times that'll become a challenge in the ROI. If you can eliminate an entire process, then it's very clean for everyone to understand where the justification is. Another thing I'd advise is trying to bundle together projects. Sometimes a project on its own won't have the ROI, but when you group it together with many other projects, the whole project as a whole has a very good ROI. And then when you're looking at things to consider in the ROI, if you're looking at a solution that reduces your staffing significantly, I think there are aspects that you want to consider in terms of including the turnover replacement costs of staff. If you had 100 people and now you have 50, on top of the reduction in headcount, there's also going to be a reduction in training, onboarding, and things of that nature, because you're not having to replace all of those positions as frequently. On the other side of the coin, you want to make sure that you include the ongoing maintenance costs to keep that equipment running. And that's something that many companies don't always recognize. They see the upfront capital costs, but they need to recognize that there is going to be an ongoing maintenance support for that equipment. So lessons learned that I've seen over the years is, management and staff buy-in are essential for project success. I've seen it just numerous times over that I've seen companies that are completely all in, and frankly, they've taken systems that were not designed very well, and they've made them run very well because they were just that committed to the success of it. And in the inverse, I've seen systems that were designed very well, and the management and staff did not have the buy-in, and there's just nothing you're going to do. It's not going to work well. So that's essential. And then I would just always advise to plan and set expectations for challenges. That when it comes to an automated system, it is not going to run. It is not going to be the same as a conventional system. And I don't want to set expectations that, oh, it's going to be easy, because I just don't think that's a good expectation to set, because then, any bump in the road, people are going to be discouraged. And with that, I would advise setting a realistic project schedule. A lot of times with automated projects, it's not like shoveling dirt. You can't throw more people at it. Many times when they're getting into a debugging aspect, that the controls and software at the final stages, everyone is chomping at the bit to get it resolved and get it working. But if they are telling you, if your integrator is telling you it's going to take 4 weeks to do that integration, I would take their word on it that it's going to take 4 weeks. If it takes less, great. But if you put them in the corner of it and expect it's going to take 2 weeks, I think you get to a point of asking 9 women to have a baby in a month. So it's just one of those things that just doesn't work. So when we look at key takeaways, I would advise make automation part of the process improvement and not an alternative to process improvement. That's probably one of the big things that I would advise taking away from this. Partner with a company that you can trust. I mean, at the end of the day, many times, people are staking their reputations on this, so you want to make sure you're dealing with someone you trust. Again, management and staff buy-in is essential. Recognize the lead times and set realistic expectations on the project schedule. And evaluation of automation is best done as part of a strategic direction. So, again, I would never view automation as an alternative. It should be part of an overall direction the company wants to take. So are there any questions?
Thank you, Troy. We are now going to begin answering the questions you submitted during today's presentation. As a reminder, you can still submit questions through the questions pane in your attendee control panel. So one of the first ones that came in during the presentation was a common concern with automation is its perceived lack of flexibility. Have you found that to be the case with projects you have worked on?
So, that is always an aspect that people are concerned of, and a lot of it has to do with, you're designing a system for a set application. That, like I said, all the aspects that go into designing a system, looking at the different order profiles and things of that nature. So you are designing a system to fulfill certain needs. So with that aspect, I can understand concerns on flexibility, but many times I'll go back to companies and ask them, okay, what's a realistic change? If you're selling widgets today, are you going to be selling widgets tomorrow? And okay, if we can say that's the same, at least now you can start to put some parameters. And I think many times it's good to have that conversation to put people's mind at ease on what are realistic changes that could occur and include them in the design, so that the system does have the necessary flexibility to address their business as it can change through the course of time.
Thank you. Another question we've had is, what advice do you have to mitigate the risk associated with brownfield automation projects?
Yeah, so brownfield automation projects many times can be the most challenging because, for many aspects. The common comparison is, Doing a brownfield automation project is like doing open heart surgery. And it's because, that you have a company who's trying to fulfill orders today, and at the same time, you're trying to install new equipment without impacting their operation. And then on top of that, you're taking an existing workforce and having them change the processes that they've done over time. These are challenges you just don't have in a greenfield environment. So when it comes to a brownfield environment, things I've seen done that I think have been very successful is, one, engaging the existing staff in the design of that new system so they have buy-in into it. I've seen this done through design workshops and things of that nature, because in a brownfield environment, one of the biggest aspects to ensure that you aren't getting disruption in operation and everything else is getting the existing staff buy-in. And then with that, also handling the change management. So, staff buy-in and change management become essential parts of any brownfield application.
We have another question that came in. Can you provide a few examples of how permits impact labor requirements?
Sure. Well, not necessarily labor requirements. So, a traditional thing that's occurred is that in a conventional environment, let's say you put in a mezzanine and to address your storage requirement, and then you put in a lift. And things that we've seen lately is, and we're dealing in different locales of Indianapolis and Chicago and Minneapolis, that the permitting requirements for mezzanines are becoming very daunting. That we've seen permitting requirements down in Indianapolis be as much as $5,000. And then on top of that, traditional solutions where you could use a vertical reciprocating lift to bring product up to that mezzanine. Now we're seeing locales kind of carte blanche making the statement that no, you have to have that lift has to be elevator compliant. And they just really don't even want to look at or understand the justification of why it's considered a vertical reciprocating conveyor versus an elevator. So those kinds of challenges in permitting are making automation a more desirable solution, because the cost of putting in the conventional solutions are just rising. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, and we have one final question. What advice would you give to anybody pursuing an automation project for the first time?
If you're a company that is really just starting to look at automation, my first piece of advice would be, try to do your research and pick a partner that you trust. That's really going to be your best avenue for success, because the industry is always changing and there's always different suppliers and vendors out there. It is very challenging even for people in the industry to keep up with things. So the two things I would advise is find a partner that you trust, and then the second one is make sure you allow enough time to do an evaluation before you need to make the major decision. It's not unusual, depending on the magnitude of things. Automation evaluation projects can last from 3 months to a year, depending on sophistication. Especially if you have a highly complex system and you want to do a simulation model. A simulation model by itself can take 3 months to create that virtual system to ensure everything's going to work correctly.
Okay, well, thank you, Troy, for presenting this material. I would also like to thank everyone who joined us today. We hope you found this information to be relevant and valuable to your organization. Following this webinar, we'll be sending you a copy of today's presentation and a very short survey about today's webinar. We ask that you take a few minutes to let us know what you thought and offer any feedback on topics you would like to see in future Associated University webinars. Additionally, if you have any questions about automation, please feel free to email us at info, that's I-N-F-O, at associated, A-S-S-O-C-I-A-T-E-D, -solutions.com. Thank you and have a great day.